I'm ready. So a little bit of context. First of all, I apologize because I've got a nasty cold, so there's that going on. I'm preaching again to the Unitarian Universalist congregation at First Unitarian Church in Louisville, my home congregation. I thought it was interesting that recently a survey of the congregation showed that 60% of the congregation, roughly, identifies as earth-centered in their religious tradition. I thought that was interesting. UU congregations are intentionally welcoming of all faith traditions, as well as people who hold to no particular faith tradition. But knowing the traditions that predominate in our congregations can be helpful in terms of targeting the message a little bit. But we also have to be aware that kind of everybody's in the room when we're preaching. My congregation is accustomed to a lecture-style sermon with occasional forays into more interactive approaches. One of the issues that I've been working with them on for several years is opening up worship to a variety of styles that are approachable for people who have different learning styles or who have different abilities or who are neurodiverse in various ways. And so I challenge them to look at worship as not just a sit and receive experience always. And so that informs what I'm doing today as well. I walked along the road that follows Jack's Creek, swinging along with my dog Lucy. I was enjoying the blue sky, the bright leaves, and then suddenly, just a few feet in front of us, a great blue heron rose from the creek and silently flapped its wings as it glided along the creek bed ahead of us. Lucy and I stopped in awe of this huge bird. Adults have a wingspan of up to 6.5 feet. They're enormous. It flew out of sight around the bend in the creek. And a few minutes later, the same heron rose from the creek in front of us again. How was it that we got that close and I hadn't seen it until just then? Their blue-gray plumage really camouflages them against that autumn creek water. And we had disturbed her hunting again. And again, a third time, the majestic bird rose from the water and flew down the creek in front of us. She must have wondered why we were chasing her. Of course, we weren't actually chasing her. I walk the farm and the creek regularly. It's part of my personal spiritual practice, which is an earth-centered one. My walks are critical to my well-being of mind, body, and spirit. For me, being in nature heals and restores my spirit in a way that few other things can do. It gives me time and space to process my thoughts, and it keeps both me and Lucy relatively physically healthy. When I saw the heron, I thought immediately of the poem by Wendell Berry that I handed out to you. And if I were preaching in my congregation, I would have that on the screen behind me. It's called The Peace of Wild Things. When despair grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. So how many of you have woken up in the middle of the night at the least sound, worrying about the future? Mm-hmm. None of you have? I can't believe it. Okay. Will we be able to get this important thing done? Will we be safe? Will we have enough? Will we be loved? Will we make friends? will we be good enough? Will our loved ones be safe? Will they be loved? Will they have enough, right? Oh my goodness, there is a lot to worry about right now. Our world seems broken in so many ways. Just this past week, another innocent black man was shot and killed by police. Refugee children were tear gassed at our border. And the death toll from the California wildfires continues to rise. Oh my goodness, we are broken in so many ways. Our hearts are broken open again and again by this world and by its inhabitants. Mistrust and blaming are rampant. Recently, my colleague Michelle Ma made a statement that I find so true. I love this. I'm going to use it everywhere. She said, "We move at the speed of trust." We move at the speed of trust. And she was talking about the church and how in order to build healthy church congregations, we need to build trust. But I think it applies everywhere. Mistrust leads to fear, and fear often leads to paralysis. So what do we do with this distrust, this fear, our brokenheartedness that surrounds us and our world? What do we do when we wake in the night at the slightest sound, worrying about our and our children's future? Well, Barry has an interesting answer. He goes and lies down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. So I have this image in my head of Wendell Berry, who is a Kentuckian, older guy now, getting up out of bed in his pajamas, trying to be quiet, sneaking out of bed, trying not to wake his wife. As he gets out of bed in the middle of the night, he's woken up, he's worrying, and he walks out, puts his barn coat on, walks out onto the farm, goes to the pond, or goes to that place, that still place on the creek where the ducks and the herons come to feed. I have to admit, the idea of laying down in the grass in Kentucky at any time other than after a killing frost makes me itch all over, what with the chiggers and the ticks. But I suppose literary license allows us that image of lying down on the grass next to this water. And there, near the pond or the stream, Barry says he comes into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. It is this peace of wild things that I also seek as I walk the farm or the creek. The peace of being able to be fully present in the moment, rather than worrying about tomorrow or today or yesterday. To be fully centered and grounded. And maybe that's why Barry lies on the ground, metaphorically, being grounded. To be fully centered and grounded in the present is in fact what brings me peace on the rare occasion when I can achieve it. He goes on to say, I come into the presence of still water. I find it interesting that he says, I come into the peace, followed by, I come into the presence. There's that repetition, that alliteration of that sound. I think he's pointing us to something. And did anyone else notice this? He goes to lie down in pastures beside still waters. Anybody ever heard that before? Yeah, that's from Psalms 23:2, right? Sneaky. So Barry may be alluding to his Christian heritage as another source of peace and presence, in addition to the healing of nature. He goes on to say that he feels above him the day-blind stars waiting for their light. I find this phrase interesting in a couple of ways. First, if he's out in the field in his pajamas, how is he feeling the day-blind stars? Because the stars are day-blind during the day, right? And he's out there in his pajamas, presumably at night. Well, maybe he's using this line to show us that we shouldn't be taking this waking in the night quite as literally as I have taken it, but rather that there are many times that he comes to this place of wild things, seeking peace, day and night. Second, I love this image of the day-blind stars that he evokes. He feels them rather than seeing them. He feels that their light is there, just waiting to be seen. In a time when we cannot see the light, we can still feel that it is there. How? My personal answer has been by becoming more centered and grounded in the present. When I'm more fully present, I don't have to actually see the light. I know it's there. I feel it in my bones. And then the final line of the poem, for a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. What is this grace of the world that he rests in? Maybe he's alluding to the idea that wild things are fully present in the present moment. And that is certainly a moment of grace. The cessation of our busyness, our need to be going and doing all the time, being connected all the time, right? Ceasing that is a graceful moment. It is one, as Barry says, that sets us free, free from worry, free from forethought of grief, free from fear. We come into presence and peace. Notice that he does not just say that we feel free here. He says, I am free. There is real healing in that grace, not just a feel-good moment. For me, Barry's poem is a very accurate representation of how spiritual healing happens for me personally. I find strength and peace most easily when I'm out in nature and connected to it. Later then, when I'm in other environments, I can draw on that deep sense of peace and groundedness, that grace of the world, and be free wherever I am. But not everyone finds healing and grace most readily in nature. There are so many sacred places and ways in our world, a beautiful abundance of grace waiting for us to find it and be free. You may have many ways to connect with the sacred, ways and practices that heal your soul, set you free from forethought of grief. Or you may need to spend some time just to be able to remember one, and that's okay too. Whatever might be the case, we all have the capacity to connect with that healing grace. So when you entered, you found on your seat a piece of paper and a pencil, and you wondered, what is she going to make me do? I'd like to offer you a moment to work with those tools, to tell a story about what heals your broken open heart. You might use the tools to write a poem, a story, a paragraph, a line, a phrase, or you might use them to doodle or to draw. What brings you grace and healing? Barry comes into the peace of wild things to rest in the grace of the world and be free. Where or how do you find peace and grace when you're struggling? I'll give you just a couple of minutes to work on that. So I know that's a very short amount of time, but let's come back together. If you're not able to finish, don't worry. That's okay. Feel free to take that with you and continue to think about it and work on it. So here's another challenge, as if that one maybe weren't enough. I'd also like you to think about what one thing you will do, you'll commit to do this week in order to come into presence and peace, to find grace. One thing that you will commit to do this week, to come into presence and peace and find grace. How often will you do that? And maybe, as I see some of you doing, maybe you would even like to write that down as a commitment to yourself on your paper. So whatever you have written or drawn, and maybe some of you who are close to the front can see, I started a not so great drawing of a tree. I find trees special and sacred for myself. Hang on to this. Put it someplace where you might see it this week. On your fridge, on your dashboard, wrap your phone up in it, right? Whatever you've written or drawn, whatever it is that heals your soul, this can become a spiritual practice for you. And spiritual practices are called practices. Well, why? Why are they called practices? Right? Because you have to do them. You have to practice them. And practice means that the outcome isn't necessarily the only goal. Doing the practice itself is a worthy enterprise. Wendell Berry grew up as a practicing Christian, but over time his practice became one of solitary walks on his Kentucky farm, where he still lives. And it's clear from his large body of work that being present in and with nature is an important spiritual practice for him, where he finds peace and grace. What is ours? And will we practice? For if we do, and we are able to find our own peace and grace in a world that inspires fear for our lives and the lives of our children, maybe, just maybe, we can bring a bit of that peace and grace into the larger world. Maybe we can find a way out of our fear and mistrust into hope and compassion. When we practice healing our own broken open hearts, we are able to touch others' hearts as well. What a powerful gift. On the wings of the great blue heron, may it be so. And I didn't have to blow my nose one time.